Um, Thank you for joining us today. The topic that we're going to focus on today is all about channel engagement. And what we're going to discuss is how you can apply personalization, automation, and some other relevant tactics and strategies to stay relevant with your channel partners and channel salespeople. So I'm going to get going here. First, I'll quickly introduce myself. I've been with ChannelAssist for about 4 years now, and really focusing on working with a range of industries from the retail space to high technology on what is the best way to drive engagement, both at the partner level, but also what we're going to talk about on this webinar is specifically how do you get in front of the individual contributors, the salespeople, sales engineers, all those people at your partners who are engaging with your customers day in and day out. And before I introduce our featured speaker, Derek Smith, I'm going to quickly get Lucy to just cover some housekeeping notes before we get started.
Hello everyone, I'm Lucy Nguyen. I am the Content Marketing Specialist at ChannelAssist. Before we start, so there's a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. I will be monitoring it. We will send a copy of the webinar to you afterwards, so please look forward to it. And finally, have fun. Back to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to make this as interactive. Please contribute. Again, as Lucy said, put some questions in the Q&A or the chat feature, and we'll make sure to get to them if we can. So I'll let Derek kick it off, and we'll get going.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Anyway, welcome everybody. Excited to be here with you guys this afternoon. Just a little bit about myself before we get into some of the stuff we wanted to talk about is, I've been in the channel for almost 30 years. So I started working with Hewlett Packard in the channel in 1990. I spent roughly 28 of those years at HP, Apple, and working with Fitbit in their channels organization to launch products. So I've got a lot of experience on both the commercial and the consumer side. And I think that's why this talk this afternoon is pretty interesting, so that we can share some of the thoughts that I have from my channel experience, as well as the experience we have at ChannelAssist. The most interesting channel experience that I had was managing the Hewlett Packard channels. Not only when we were starting to form everything, but also when we were merging with Compaq and having to put together two very distinct channel organizations together, and a lot of the things we learned through that integration. In those 10 years specifically managing that piece of the business, I was trying to do some math the other day. I think it was over 500 and probably less than 700 meetings with channel partners. So you get to really understand how channel partners operate, and I would say how us being vendors and manufacturers can deal with partners and some of the things that they're looking for. So now that I'm at ChannelAssist, it's fun being back in the channel. And the way I would describe it is it's almost like putting on those old comfortable pair of running shoes. And now it feels just like a nice fit back, back where I've come from. And it's a whole lot of fun working with channel partners and with vendors who are looking at doing some programs with channel partners. So with that, why don't we get into the slides?
Excellent.
So, the point of this slide here really is, everything is weird until it's normal. And, the examples that I would, talk about here would be, Uber. Whoever thought that you'd be able to order a taxi or some sort of car that will come and give you a lift by just picking up a device and tapping on it. Uber launched in 2010, Lyft launched in 2012. And once these apps and companies came to market, it sounded like it was something weird, but all of a sudden it became normal. The same thing when you look at your Apple Watch. If you're using a smartwatch or an Apple Watch, it's something where you can measure your heart rate, your ECG. You can monitor your ECG. You can also use it for a boarding pass. And it tells time. So again, something weird until it became normal and you were using it. Airbnb. would be another example. Whoever thought that you'd be renting a room or even potentially your entire house to someone that you didn't even speak to, you didn't even know, and it was all done by an app. So again, it's those things that have happened in our lifetime where they were kind of weird, and then all of a sudden they became normal. And a lot of this, if you move to the next slide, which is talking about companies that didn't adapt and engage with their customers. So you can see on this slide, we've got 3 examples of companies that really didn't see it coming. They didn't engage with their customers. And this ties back into what we're talking about in figuring out how to deal with channel partners and their customers. I'll use Blockbuster as the first example. Blockbuster, I remember back when I used to go to Blockbuster to rent a video, and we'd go there, we'd walk around, get the free popcorn, and we'd always want to get a movie that someone else had already rented. Well, a company came along by the name of Netflix who'd figured out what customers really wanted. It was people like myself who wanted to go you could go at the early days of Netflix, but you wanted to be able to watch a movie when you wanted to, not necessarily when that movie was available. And Netflix came along and really took the business away from Blockbuster. They figured out what the customer wanted, and they adapted, and then they brought that business model to market. Interesting story is Blockbuster actually had the opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million in the year 2000 and just never really saw it coming. BlackBerry is another example. BlackBerry was the king of instant messaging and a phone. They didn't see something like the iPhone and soon to be other Android phones coming. In 2007, when Apple introduced the iPhone, BlackBerry didn't really see that as a threat. They weren't engaged with their customer trying to figure out what else the customers wanted, because at that time when the iPhone came out, there was no Siri, there was no App Store, there were no videos on an iPhone. But Apple listened. They developed these other features and benefits that the customers wanted. They brought that to market, and we all know what happened to BlackBerry. The other one would be Kodak. Kodak never thought that a phone would be their competitor, and never really saw whether it was BlackBerry or Android or Apple or Android phones. Never saw that coming, and it took their market away from them. Right now, 1.3 trillion pictures will be taken in 2022, and that still seems like a low number. Who knows? It could be a lot higher. But those are some examples of companies that really didn't engage with what their customers wanted, and new competitors came along and listened to what the customers wanted and took their business.
I used to have this boss that I hated, not at this company, not you, Derek, but I used to work in a kind of, like a boiler room situation, and he'd walk around and stomp his feet, clap his hands, get everybody excited to sell. But he always had this phrase, complacency is the enemy. And even though I didn't like the guy, that kind of stuck with me. And I had a quick question for you. And maybe at Apple or in your past experience, do you see what did Apple do or what did HP do that was maybe a little bit different from Blockbuster or BlackBerry? Because it seems like they kind of rested on their laurels and obviously paid the price.
Yeah, I'd say both companies spent a lot of money on marketing, and marketing being to get data from customer, and whether it was through email to get the information or focus groups, and try to figure out what the customers wanted. Now, for sure that happened at HP. It definitely happened at Apple. But I think we all know the Apple story is a little bit different, is that Steve Jobs came up with ideas, and he listened to what customers were asking for, but he was, 1 in a million, or more than that, 1 in a trillion. He was that person that would come up with ideas, and we didn't even know we wanted some of those features. So I think it's really a combination of both. And I think some of the companies that we talked about who didn't listen, they've lost out.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So yeah, let's talk about the channel. So, at ChannelAssist, we've got a lot of experience working with vendors to drive revenue through better channel engagement. One of the key issues I faced as a channel leader was, to impact the long tail partners. And what we mean by that was, it was always easy to figure out how to deal with your top partners, But your smaller ones, because you don't have the resources to go out there, reach out there and touch them and get that feedback, it was trying to figure out what do those partners need as well. So, it was those sorts of things that drove ChannelAssist to get into the market, to figure out what can we do to help out manufacturers to understand what your key partners need, and even the long tail partners, or even those smaller partners. What we've got on the screen here is a couple of examples of organizations that we're working with, and we've helped them not only the helping with their main partners, but the long tail partners, and helping them engage the reseller partners, or the reps at the reseller partners, to be able to sell more of their products. So that's what ChannelAssist is all about. So let's now switch into talking more about the channel and some of our experiences with that. So let's talk about the channel then and now. So if you talk about the channel then, it really was a simple way of doing business. The channel strategy was simple. One size really did fit all. So it was easier back then. And when I say back then, you're probably looking at 1990 through probably 2005. Back then you would sell X and get Y. That's the type of promos that you would put in place. So you sell 10 of these, you get $50. It was simple. We were able to throw a lot of money at the channel, but one of the things that wasn't demanded of then, because the business was growing so quickly, was an ROI. So that was one of the key things. Mass communication. So there really wasn't any personalization. It was just one size fits all for the communication to the channels. And then most of the business was managed on a spreadsheet, and even then that was sophisticated, but people would manage the entire business on a spreadsheet. You can't do that anymore. If you switch gears and you say, okay, what's the channel now? It really is a complex go-to-market ecosystem, omni-channel. You really need to have a really simple and interconnected experience that provides customers with that same experience, whether they're buying direct through the channel, online. And it really is more complicated, because you now need to make sure that all of that fits together, whether it's your pricing strategy, whether it's your support strategy. And it really has changed, expectations. When you look at expectations, you look at the B2C expectations versus B2B. When anybody is buying something personally, you're going online and you're investigating what you're going to buy. Use an air fryer as an example. We just bought one. And I think we know more about air fryers than we ever thought we would. But you take that same experience and you put that into the B2B purchasing. There's so much more information available for the B2B buyers now, so they can do the same thing. And the information, because it's so readily available, in some cases, they're even going to know more about the product than some of the salespeople are selling it to them, because they've investigated all of the competitors and they know what they're looking for and they want a piece of everything. The trifurcated channel, that's something that's now something that needs to be considered. And what I mean by the trifurcated channel is it's really three areas. One is the influencer channel. So, referral agents, affiliates, advocates, ambassadors. These are all channels that are influencing the purchaser before they even get to you being the vendor or the vendor representative. There's the transaction channel, and that's where the actual transaction takes place. And then there's the retention channel. So that's after the sale, whether it's consultants, it's integrators, ISVs, and even accountants that will help you and your business retain that customer, because they're in there after the fact talking to the customers. The other thing that's made it more complicated now with the channel is the whole layer model. Really what that is, and what layer stands for, is the land, adopt, expand, and renew. And it's gaining a lot of momentum with manufacturers. It is a fancier way of saying, win the business and grow your footprint, but it's a little bit more than that. It's really now trying to figure out how you can incent the dealers or the resellers to become more committed to the vendor. And they do that by earning different levels of accreditation or even points in landing different areas of the customer, whether it's new business or it's renewal. So looking at two extremes of the layer model. And then there's the tech stack. If you look at the tech stack now versus the way it was being a spreadsheet, there are PRMs out there. There are a lot of really good incentive management tools, like ChannelAssist. There's predictive analytics. And those are just to name a few of the tools that are out there. And you really can't go on a gut feel anymore. And then I think the last one, which is probably one of the most important, is the personalized engagement. I think we all receive a ton of emails every day, whether it's personally or it's business-wise, from somebody trying to sell you something. And unless something really hits a note with you on a personal level that matters to you and not some generic type email, you're really going to delete it. So personalization is a lot more important now when you're trying to deal with the channels and trying to deal with the channel owners and the reps at the channel level. And that's a really important piece in putting together any programs right now in dealing with the channels.
Something I hear often on my side when I'm talking to customers is, and anybody who's listening, who's transitioned to subscription or consumption models, a lot of time and effort in trying to figure out how that's going to work goes into those pieces of the business. So you have to consider making sure that your engagement strategy is also aligned with that new way of generating revenue. So making sure that you pull that incentive budget to post-sale activities, things like upselling, cross-selling. Making sure that when contracts are up for renewal, are your partner salespeople, specifically the customer success teams, are they engaged and enabled to really make sure that they renew that business on time and don't lose out to either a competitor or get complacent?
Yeah, and to your point, Paul, you're right. I mean, if you look at when you're putting incentives in place, it's not just the salespeople anymore.
Right.
There's customer success and a lot of other groups within organizations that you need to consider when you're putting together a successful program.
For sure. And I think you touched on personalization probably being, if you're going to say, one of the most important pieces. But if you had, through the years of you being in the channel, is there a what is that most significant change that you've seen? Based on what you've gone through.
It's a good question. I think the key thing is it's not a one size fits all anymore. You really do need to cater the message to the different folks within the organization, whether it's the dealer, owner, manager, whether it's a sales rep, whether it's a service rep, whether it's a customer success rep. And you need to make sure that you take all of that into consideration when you're looking at putting a program in place.
Right. Excellent.
So where are we going? Let's take a look at that. So, if you take a look at where we're going, we've laid out 3 panels on this particular slide. But, industry analysts are saying that we're headed for revenue broken up by a third, a third, a third. And what I mean by that is a third in the channel, a third direct, and a third through marketplaces. A good example of, third through the channel, look at someone like Dell. Dell was 100% direct. Now they're closer to 50-50. And I think they've recognized the channel importance. And I think that was a tough learning for them at the beginning, but I think it's an important learning for them. If you look at companies like, Hewlett Packard, Hewlett Packard used to be about 80% revenue through the channel. And now it's closer to 95%. So the channel is here to stay. It's very important. And I think we all have to understand how to deal with the channel. It doesn't mean direct isn't important. I think companies are always going to have their own direct salespeople out there. But it's not going to be more than a third. And it varies on the industries between software, hardware, and other types of products. So it'll vary. But I think the key thing there is when you do have a direct sales force, you really do need to make sure that your organization is, it does have a channel neutral policy so that, support is the same no matter where your customers buy, but you also want to make sure that, your channel partners and your direct sales team work hand in hand in trying to land deals. And then the other one, which is, I wouldn't say it's new, but it's newer, is a third of it's going to be through marketplaces. Industry analysts are saying that 20 marketplaces are probably going to own about 80% of the business that's out there. And some of the top ones are, there's Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and those are going to be the key places where, customers are also going to buy, because it's easy. You don't have to talk to anyone. Just go on there. If you know what you want, you can order it. Now, the interesting
bought my car like that.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Amazon purchaser. I think it's just so much easier. And I think COVID has changed a lot of this, is that it's just so much easier now to do your groceries or do anything through Amazon instead of going to the store. One of the stats also came up is 96% of B2B leaders expect to increase their revenue from the channel. So even those companies that have, big direct sales force, you can see that, they're going to start changing the way they do things. B2B leaders expect to increase their channel budgets as well. So again, I think channels are going to become even more important. Going to the middle panel, 90% of sales are influenced by the channel. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where it's going to be purchased, but that's where it's going to be influenced. And we say influenced by the channel. That could be influencers, that could be ambassadors, that could be affiliates. So there's a lot of different ways that that's going to happen. And I think as vendors, for all of us, we need to figure out, how do we come up with the right channel strategy to encompass all of that? Buyer behavior has changed. One stat says that 68% of buyers have already researched the product before they've even reached out to a salesperson. So again, in some cases, they may even know more about what they want and what the market is versus some of the sales folks. And consumption models are changing. They have changed, but they're going to continue to change. If you look at software, it's a SaaS model now. Hardware as a service. Look at companies like Hewlett Packard and others, selling services or selling storage by the gigabyte, not by the storage array anymore. So that's changed. And, if you're putting incentive programs in place, you need to take that into account. B2B and B2C delta has collapsed. And, that's just because of the easy access to information, and that's changed. And speed, visibility, and convenience is just expected. I'll use a B2C example, but when I order something on Amazon, if it doesn't come the next day, it really kind of ticks me off, and I want to be able to take advantage of Amazon Prime and get stuff the next day. If you look back 10 years ago, if you got it within a week, you were pretty happy and it was delivered to your door. Now it's delivered next day to your door. You get notification on your phone that it's already been delivered. So expectations have changed, and I think it's going to continue to change. And that's where we're all going to have to leverage the channel as well.
Agreed. You mentioned two things that are pretty interesting from Marketer Report that was released recently. 96% of executives who were surveyed, think that revenue is going to go up from their channel ecosystem. And the second piece, that they're expecting to increase their budgets by 70%. Whether that be incentives or PRMs, data. So how are these manufacturers going to manage the channel when so much is changing and there's so many moving pieces and so much revenue going through them still?
Yeah, I think it's two things, Paul. One is, I think the vendors are going to have to hire channel managers with skill levels that they haven't had before, right? I mean, not that all of them haven't, but I think the skill level of channel managers or PBMs, you're not only going to have to be a good salesperson, because I think that's important. I think they're going to have to understand marketing like they haven't had to before. And they're also going to have finance skills, because, I think the role of a PBM is not just a salesperson. It's going to have to be somebody who understands the financial dynamics of the dealers, but they're also going to have to understand the marketing and to be able to develop marketing programs and work with the marketing groups. So I think the HR side of it's going to change. I think the other piece that's going to change for the vendors is, I think the models are going to change. We've talked a little bit about the layer model. I think we're going to see more of that happening, that the vendors are going to have to start putting plans and programs in place, not only to incent the reseller reps, but also start looking at ways to get the reseller more committed to the vendor by having them commit to more training, even having them hire more experienced people. So I think there's things that are going to change in the industry as we move forward.
I was at an event recently in Florida for the Technology Association, and not that sales leaders like to hear this, but there's a big segment on how a lot of that budget might be not cut, but moved to, again, that customer success side, the retention side, especially with the layer model becoming so prevalent with the consumption and as a service. So really focusing on that, earning your customer day by day. And because we're talking about incentives, well, we're talking about the channel, but if we take a second and talk about incentives specifically, how do you know that they're actually, with all this change, how do you know they're actually working? And there's so many moving pieces now. How do you actually see that they're contributing to the bottom line or moving?
Yeah, that's an important fact. I mean, obviously the ROI is important, but how do you get the ROI? First of all, you got to have a good, system in place in which you can measure your sales and you can look at what your spend is. And, that's where obviously someone like us at ChannelAssist comes into play, because we can help provide that data. So I think that's one key important tool that when I was managing, the channels wasn't around. So I think that's a key thing, or it was, but it was evolving. So I think that's one key thing. The other thing is having solutions in place that allows you to survey the partners easily, so you can get the information back quickly, whether it's the dealer owner managers or it's even the folks that are the feet on the street. So I think surveys are getting that kind of information. If you're a vendor, just getting feedback from your own people, your PBMs. I mean, those are your paid feet on the street. So I think that information is important. And then even having, things like roundtables. I think roundtables are important, because I think that's one way of getting feedback directly from partners. You just have to be careful, because I think a lot of times if you're a vendor, the people you invite to the roundtables are people who you actually meet with often. And, you've got to make sure that you're not getting skewed in getting information that you already know and getting into a whole bunch of, group think. But I think getting that feedback is important. And I think that's where tools like we have will allow you to reach out to those long tail partners. So the partners, that are at the lower end of your revenue, and getting feedback from them on what they're looking for. Because the one thing you have to remember is, just because a particular reseller is a low volume reseller for you, that doesn't mean that they're a low volume reseller. That just means they're a low volume reseller for you. And maybe you need to change some of the things that you're doing.
That's a good point. One thing that I might add to that is, with all the tools that are available today and all the moving pieces, when you're thinking about incentives, I think gone are the days where the sporadic, ad hoc, subjective, I just ran this incentive and I think it worked, days are over. Make sure you're capturing the data from all the activities you're running. So if you're running a promotion, or you're trying to incentivize, let's say, a specific type of training with your partner salespeople, ensuring that you can actually capture that information and then get fed back that relevant intelligence that you can actually make better decisions and then actually make or justify the spend. So that's a thought too.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's a good segue into this next piece. We've got a couple of areas that we've kind of narrowed down that we've seen work in the past.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And those, the three that we'll talk about would be, dynamic promotions, and I'll explain that a little bit better in a second. The one-to-one rep engagement, we've talked about that already, and how, getting to the rep at the dealer is important, because it's, kind of the place where the rubber meets the road. And then gamification. And I think gamification is important, but I think the key thing around that is more the community, because gamification, I think, is going to work in some areas and maybe not so much in others. So let's talk about dynamic promotions.
Let's do it.
So if you think about dynamic promotions, the first thing is, what is it? So, the world has changed. It's not just the, sell X, get Y. So sell a printer, get $15. It's now becoming a lot more complicated than that. And I think what vendors are starting to realize is that you want to incent the partners on different things. So not just the final sale. Hey, at the end of the day, that's important because that's what matters. But you want to incent them on things that will bring them to the final sale more quickly, or to make sure that they can expand within the account. So as an example, some of the promotions that we've put on with some of our customers is to incent them for the pre-sales behavior. So it's booking appointments. It could be selling specific SKUs. It could be demos. It could be getting customers in specific markets. So all that stuff is important because as a vendor, you may have different targets in different areas, but this helps drive that activity. If you take a look at strategic sales and new sales, it could be in some of those areas. But the bottom line with dynamic promotions is it's not just about selling X and then getting Y. It's all about doing different things to reward and incent the reseller and the reseller rep to get closer to the goal of getting the sale and getting the revenue. But it's incenting them along the way. So if they get an appointment, they'll get X. If they get the appointment and do a demo, they may get 2X, and it keeps moving up there. So they keep getting more in doing the activities, because we all know the sale is important, but you've got to do the activities to get there.
And I think you mentioned something earlier that was interesting, right? With the long tail, and just because they're in there doesn't mean that they're bad partners or they're bad at what they do and they're low volume. It just means that they're selling something else. So for people who are listening and trying to think about, how do I get more out of the people who are not performing? Again, think about those ideas where you can reward people for their time, for changing from what they're selling today. So if you can give people a compelling reason through either money or knowledge to become more confident in your solution, a great way to do it is, again, rewarding for those pre-sales as well as the sale and then after the sale to really make it worth their time to go from selling one thing to now selling something that you want them to.
Yeah, and training's even a part of that as well, Paul.
Yeah.
If you can incent them for training, that's good. But I think when you say training and you're saying it to a salesperson, it's a dirty word. It's got to be micro training. Not nobody, but a lot of people would prefer to not take these long training sessions. They're 30, 45 minutes. As a career salesperson, sometimes we have ADD, and it's tough to stay focused for that long. But the micro training is good. 10, 12-minute training sessions, and really incent them to take that training. And if you can just inch them along the road to getting more comfortable and familiar with the product or the service, that's going to really help out.
Right. And I did have a question, but I think you've answered it. But if you have anything to add, these sound great. There's a lot of moving pieces. How do you recommend somebody starts, managing this? Or even starting with something a little bit more, like a dynamic promotion?
Yeah, the way I would look at it is think about it, analyze it internally, but don't overanalyze it. You know what? Start off simple. Try with a small program, maybe even with a subset of your partners, and really just don't overthink it. Just try it out, give it a shot in a specific area of your business, and then make sure you have a tool that allows you to track it. Because if you're starting off, you want to do a quick pilot program, you want to still have the data, you want to be able to measure the ROI, so then you can start small and then just end up growing that program. And you can start it off with incenting by dollars for people to do things. You can do it by incenting them with points, and then that certainly would limit or control your spend, because if you're giving out points, then you only have to award the top X number of people, so you can have a defined budget, versus if you're giving out a dollar amount per activity, you don't have a cap on the end of that program for your budget. So there's different ways to look at it, but my philosophy would be think about it, figure out what your objective is, and give it a try, but don't overthink it.
Yeah, don't spread yourself too thin.
Yeah. So personalized and gamified. So, I mean, I think the key thing here is, you got to make it easy. So again, it's similar to what I just said before. Don't overthink it, but you need to make the program you're putting in place easy to understand. And the easier it is to understand, the more the reps will get engaged. It's as simple as that. If you use an example, I have a lot of apps on my iPhone. There's quite a few of them that I don't use. And why do I not use them? It's not that they're not good apps. Is that the first time I used it, it was too difficult to understand. And if you've got a program that's difficult to understand, even though it's got all the right objectives and finance put that together because they've developed this program, they said, we need all of these metrics, so make it so that we get all that information back. You're probably not going to have a lot of success because the reps aren't going to use it. Use your iPhone as the example. Like I said, I've got so many apps on my iPhone that I don't use because you've tried to use it the first time, and even though it was a great app, it just was too hard to use, so I don't bother. So I go back to the easier ones. And I would say keep that same philosophy in mind when you're developing a program so that it's easy to use for the reps. They don't want to have to use or read any user's manual to better understand how to make this happen. What we've got here on this slide is a couple of ideas of leaderboards. Leaderboards work. Salespeople are very competitive, right? And a leaderboard will allow them to see where they stand versus other folks in their organization, or depending upon your program, you may even want to show resellers competing against each other. The perfect example I would use is Fitbit. In my experience working with Fitbit is, if anyone's used a Fitbit watch and you've gone into the leaderboards, friends can challenge you to walk your 10, 12, 20,000 steps a day, and where they're at. And you look at that once a day, and at times it'll just really motivate you to go and walk another 3,000 steps because I don't want that person to beat me. And that's just one example of how a community can be formed, but it's a competitive community with the leaderboard that'll drive people to potentially, sell more of your product. We've gone the far bottom right corner. We've got an example of a program we've launched with one of our customers where it shows the community, and it's the same sort of thing as Fitbit, people competing with each other. But this is an area where we were trying to combine all the folks in different organizations that we wanted them to work together to share some stories. So again, there's different ways we can do this, and it depends on your business. And we have lots of different ways in which we can customize this specifically for your business, your resellers, and your reseller reps.
And something that I think is important as well, the flexible rewards. Everyone's got, everyone's partners are a little bit different. They've all got different competencies, different strengths. So what works for one partner is not going to work for another. So giving partners and partner salespeople the ability to choose and to give them what is relevant to them is extremely powerful to keep them selling, to keep them engaged in whatever activities you're looking to get them to drive forward.
Yeah, for sure. You got to give them flexibility so when they do earn the points, or they have different ways in which they can spend it, because not one size.
Yeah, and they're all selling different things, right? And to your point with HP is, you might have companies who are focused on managed services for printers and some selling notebooks or storage. Everybody, those rewards need to reflect the effort in terms of what they're selling and what they're actually doing.
Yeah. So engagement. Yeah, so engagement's changed everywhere. I think the key thing here is if you look at how people are engaging, using examples with education, fitness, and the channel. Education, things have changed, right? It used to be books, now it's an iPad. So you used to never be able to get your kids to read books. Now you throw an iPad in front of them and they're learning and they don't even know that they're learning. Fitness, people used to log how much weight they've lifted or how many miles they ran. And now it's all tracked, on a phone on a watch, or even on your phone as well. And in the channel, it used to be a spreadsheet. That's how you manage the business. Now, incentive management tools, PRMs, and data analytics tools. So there's lots of ways to manage the business, and it just shows that it's changing everywhere around us, and the channel's no different. Used to be spreadsheets, and now it's just changed into a variety of different ways to manage the business.
Absolutely.
So, let's talk about one customer success story. And, won't name the company, but, what they wanted to do is use monetary and non-monetary awards. And why that was important for them is the monetary awards certainly drive salespeople, customer success people, anybody in the channels organization. The good news with that is it's people get the money, they know how much they're going to make. From a manufacturer standpoint, you really need to figure out how you manage your budget. Non-monetary rewards are rewarding them with points so that they can then, earn something. But your ability with the benefit of non-monetary awards is you can set your own budget. So you can say that we're going to provide points for people for doing things, but we're going to only reward the top 15, 20, or 30 people. So you already know what your budget is. What we've found is when you combine the two, you can run a very, very successful program. And in this case, and again, if you guys want to contact us after this webinar and have discussions with Paul and myself specifically, we can share some of the details on this. This one particular customer over a 1-year period increased their case studies by 135%. Looking after marketing or being involved in marketing over the years, that's always a really tough thing to get. But if you can put a non-monetary reward in place for case studies, you'd be surprised what you can end up getting. We had a 120% increase in sales claim submissions, which is important because at the end of the day, that's what drives a lot of the ROI. Social media followers were up 550%, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And those are areas that, it's hard to measure how successful and how much that can drive your bottom line. But again, we put something in place for this and look at the numbers that it increased. Increased the revenue by 126%, which is really a function of the increase in sales submissions. So, one ties into the other. And then with this particular program, we won the Demand Gen Award in 2021, which is an industry award for this particular program. So again, we've had some success doing this. We'd love to share some of these stories with you in how we can potentially help you out.
What I find interesting about this program specifically was the ability to be flexible with the objectives, because there's multiple organizations in the channel that have different goals. For example, marketing is really looking to get those case studies and trying to boost their social media presence, while sales is all about the revenue. So back to those dynamic promotions and being able to reward for different activities, just keep in mind that you can get creative in the way that you want to reward your channel for doing specific sales, pre-sales and post-sales services. And again, there's, we've got a number of stories that show the success.
So, in wrapping it up, why ChannelAssist? So, the key thing is, what do we do? So, we work with organizations to help optimize, the channel engagement strategy. And what do we mean by that? It's just, helping you with the dealers and the dealer reps sell more of what you have, whether it's a product or a service. And that's really what we do. And how do we do it? Well, we've got good people in the organization that have a lot of channel experience, so we can certainly help out there. We have great technology, whether it's a SaaS-based platform or other technologies we have to help you know where the money is being spent and what your return is. And then we really do have a world-class marketing organization, because without the marketing, we couldn't leverage the technology to help you grow the business. And those are the three key things I'd keep in mind if you're thinking about incentive programs. Certainly, we at ChannelAssist feel that we can help, and we'd love to have those conversations to see if we actually can help you out.
Awesome. Thank you, Derek. As you're talking, I can see a number of questions coming in, so I want to make sure, because we're 15 minutes to the top of the hour, so I want to make sure we can hit a couple of those. Lucy, are you able to maybe drop a couple of questions so we can get maybe Derek to answer? Get it back and forth going. Thank you.
So the first question that we have, they ask, there is a shift to just incentive the partner. Is this a short-term or long-term shift? Is there a strategy that you can recommend to create a balance? You just
So is it a short and long term? Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I'd answer that, Lucy, if I understand the question, is it's both. I mean, short-term strategy, yes, but I think if you're getting involved with this, I think it truly is a long-term strategy, and you want to make sure the business is aligned behind it. Because if anyone thinks it's a quick fix, you can do something for a week or a month, and it's going to change the direction of your business. That's not going to be the case. I think you need to commit to doing something like this. Now, it doesn't need to be for a year, but certainly, like a 3-month program would make sense to start, just so that you can get the messaging out there, make sure everyone understands it. Because, as we all know, large ships can't turn on a dime. It takes a bit of time for that to happen.
And I actually had a recent engagement just like this, actually, that this question. I had a customer that had been in the channel. They're in the broadcasting space, so may not have never heard of them, but they do work with the BBC, CBC, NBC. So they're in a well-established organization, and they've been in the channel for over 50 years. All they were doing were basically incentivizing the partner. The executives got along really well. They went all to the same events. Things were great. They go to market with a new product, and they'd introduce it to their partners. It was all well received. But over the span of 5-10 years, what they were realizing is that the good word from the top didn't necessarily translate to revenue. That those new products that were coming to market were not being sold. So what they ended up finding out is, yes, you have to incent the partner, but that messaging or that motivation was actually creating a wider gap between the executive and actually the salespeople, the sales engineers, the ones who are actually talking to customers. So to Derek's point, it's both, right? You make sure you incentivize the partner, but also make sure that there's something in for the rep, and communicating with the rep that, hey, this is our new vision, this is our new strategy, this is why you should now start selling this type of product. And we saw, between 25 and 35% increase in engagement and new revenue over the first year.
Good points. Okay, we have another question. They ask, are spiff still something that works in the channel?
Quick answers, yeah, sure. But I think what you need to do is you really need to stand back and think about what's the objective. So that's the first thing is, so what do you want to accomplish, and can you measure it? So I think those are the two key things, because you want to know what you want to accomplish. You obviously need to be able to measure it. And, the thing we talked about before is it needs to be easy to understand, not only at the dealer, owner, manager level, but at the rep level. And it kind of reminds me of when you set, if you look at just what you want to get done in your organizations, when you're wanting to set out some objectives for the organization, you always start off with a SMART objective. So it's what? Specific, measurable, actionable, achievable, and has a timeline beside it. So it needs to be specific. So that, that's for sure. It needs to be measurable. So, you can, measure it. You need to be achievable, because if something's not achievable, if you put an incentive out there and say, bring in $1 million of business by Thursday, people are going to ignore it. And then it's also got to be, a specific timeline around it, so that, you have a time and you can measure it afterwards. So yeah, for sure. Spiffs still work in the channel, and they probably will for a long time.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, another question that we got in is a partner advisory board a good idea?
I've done a lot of them, and I would say the answer is yes. However, you have to be very careful, though, when you're putting together an advisory board, because the easy thing to do is to invite your buddies to become your advisory board. The good side, or the positive of that is you'll have good meetings and there'll be great dinners afterwards, and you'll really enjoy being at the meeting. The downside is you could get into a lot of group think, and that's the danger of not inviting people that you don't normally work with. So I think, yes, the advisory board is a really good idea, but you need to make sure and think it through on who you're inviting, have clear objectives so they get something out of it. Otherwise, they're not going to come back. But make sure you invite people that you may not like the feedback you're going to get, but that'll help you and your channel program grow.
That's really good advice. Okay, another question. We're almost done. So how do you get the CFO on board / how do you justify and measure success?
How do you get the CFO on board? Well, there's really only one way that I've ever been able to get a CFO on board with anything.
One and done?
Is to be able to have very specific data and measurable data. And I think that's the key thing, right? It's to have objective data that he or she will be able to look at and determine the success of a program. I think if you have anything that's fluffy or you can't measure it, you're not going to get the support of the CFO, and they're not going to be on board. So clear, clean data and measurable objectives with timeframes. So it kind of goes back to what we had just answered in the previous question as well.
I totally agree. Okay, final question that we got. What is the future of incentives?
Probably a whole bunch of things, but I think the key thing is they're here to stay. But I think it's personalization. So you need to be able to make sure that your incentives are specific to the folks at the dealer that you're trying to incent. So it's not a one size fits all within the dealer and even within your channels. I think that's the key thing. And then the only thing I would throw in there is also making sure that your organization is behind the incentive, so that you've got everyone's buy-in, that people aren't going to be looking for results within a week or within a couple of weeks. It's going to take a little bit of time because there's an overall strategy around it, and you need to make sure that everyone is bought into it before you launch.
Oh, we just got a little question in. Okay, wait, one last question. Are tiers still relevant to incentive programs?
Sorry, say that again, Lucy, please.
Oh, are tiers still relevant to incentive programs?
Like the platinum, gold, silver tier, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of talk in the industry if it's still important or not. I think the key thing on that side of it, in my opinion, is it's less about the tiers and it's more about the different types of channel partners that you have. Because different channel partners will be rewarded differently for different things. And that's all about the commitment of the reseller to the vendor and earning the different stripes. So in one way, I guess I'm saying yes, it is, but I think it's more along the lines of, as the vendors, I think we have to have different programs for different types of resellers or dealers.
Yeah, so make it specific. Yep, I agree. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you so much. Any final words? Yeah.
So thank you, Derek, for that. It was excellent. And thank you for your time. Before we let everybody take off, I know we've got 5 minutes here. You've been managing the channel or been in the channel since 1990. I was born 1 year before that. So I'd be interested to know what's your biggest learning, or what is it that you see into the future, or what do you take away?
My biggest learning is, I guess, I'm really old.
Oh.
Yeah, I shouldn't have put 1990 as the as the number, but yeah, I started at HP in '89. What's the most important thing that I've learned over the years? Yeah, I think it's one thing, and I think this is where some of the companies that worked out did a good job with it, is having integrity in your channel's program. So if you say you're going to do something, do it. As an organization, if your leader's standing up, talking to all the channel partners and saying, these are our 3 priorities, live by them. Make sure that, what you say is what you do, because people are going to pay attention to that. If you have a channel strategy, make sure it's, we talked about it before, omni-channel. Make sure that you've thought it through. I was around when Amazon was launched, and that was a real interesting time to have a direct business. We had Amazon, you had your resellers. But if you were clear with people on what your priorities were, and you stuck by them, I think people appreciate it, respect it. They don't always have to agree with it. But I think if you say you're going to do something, do it. And don't try to hide anything. If you're a vendor and you go, I'm just going to take this one deal direct and not tell anybody, guess what? There are no secrets in the channel. So again, I just think it all goes back to integrity, and what you say you're going to do it.
Well put. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again, Derek.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you for tuning in.
Okay, thanks everybody.